Good evening and welcome. Tonight I'm going to read you two articles out of History magazine. And as you can tell by the title, we will be talking about the Silk Road. You can see from the beautiful cover here. We'll talk about just the history of the Silk Road, and then we'll read this short article about a lost Silk Road town called Dandan-Oilik in China. Now China, right? These articles, though, were chosen by my channel members. These were chosen by Krista, Jill, Cappy, and Chris W. Thank you so much for picking these. And if you would like to pick a History magazine article in the future, actually in the very soon to be future, you can click the join button right down here. Or if you're on mobile and there is no join button, you can open the description box and click the very first link in there. It will take you to my channel member page, where it is only 99 US cents a month to join, and you get all kinds of perks to join. You get to watch all of my videos early before anyone else. You get exclusive videos, like for example, this article about the Great Smog of London we just looked at for channel members, if you'd like to see that. But you also get to pick History magazine articles, which I have my new magazine. And I will be posting the list of articles probably in about 2 days or so after I post this video. So if you want to pick future articles now, right now is the time to join. But without further ado, let's read some articles about the Silk Road. Here we go. The Silk Roads, because there was more than one for sure. The Silk Roads. Let's check it out. In the year 166 CE, Chinese chroniclers recorded that ambassadors from the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius presented themselves at the imperial court of Luoyang in east-central China and were given an unusual welcome. The travelers had come via Malaysia, followed the coasts of Thailand and Vietnam, and docked at a Chinese port at the mouth of the Red River in the Gulf of Tonkin. Then, escorted by Chinese military authorities, they traveled overland for another 1,200 miles or so, passing numerous fortresses and walled cities. Anticipation at the Chinese court mounted as the travelers grew closer. The Chinese had long been aware that the Roman Empire existed. They knew it as Daqin, the Great China, and considered it to be equal in power to their own empire. But this was the first time direct contact had been established. However, when the ambassadors arrived, it was noted with some disapproval that they had only brought with them mere trinkets picked up in Southeast Asia, ivory, rhinoceros horns, and turtle shells, but nothing that evoked the glory of Rome. The Chinese emperor and his courtiers wondered if they might be Western merchants living in Asia, and not really emissaries of the Roman emperor at all. The Chinese were also confused about why these Western travelers had come via Vietnam. The normal route between East and West was through the Gansu Corridor, which connected the Yellow River Basin with Central Asia. Chinese explorer and diplomat Zheng Qian had traveled to Central Asia via the Gansu Corridor in the 2nd century BCE, and the fertile strip of land would later become a significant section of the Silk Roads. In the West, interest in the Great Route through Asia had begun centuries earlier. The Western presence in Central Asia dates back to the time of Alexander the Great, who led his troops as far as the Indus River and founded several cities in the region. But the first trading contacts with the Far East were established by sea, following a route from the Egyptian port of Alexandria during the Ptolemaic dynasty. The ambassadors' pathway was more evidence of the growing number of routes along the Silk Roads. A castaway reveals the route. The discovery of a maritime route to the Far East came out of a chance encounter. The crew of a patrol vessel in the Red Sea found a ship adrift with a half-dead man on board. As no one spoke his language, they couldn't establish where he was from and decided to take him back with them to Alexandria. When the man had learned sufficient Greek, he explained to them that he was an Indian sailor and that his ship had drifted off course. Grateful for the treatment he received in Alexandria, he offered to navigate for any Greek vessel that would return him to his homeland. The king of Egypt, which at that time was Ptolemy the Eighth, Euergetes II. Should note that I'm probably going to mispronounce stuff in this article. My bad. Entrusted the command of an Indian expedition to the explorer Eudoxus of Cyzicus. Cyzicus? It's another. I'm going to go with Cyzicus. I hope that's correct. A Greek who had entered the court of Alexandria as ambassador of his native city, Cyzicus, on the shores of the Sea of Marmara. At court, Eudoxus heard about navigation routes up the Nile and of the exotic wonders that could be found along the shores of the Red Sea. He was an astute man of the world and soon picked the Indian sailor's brain about how best to cross the Indian Ocean. The vital information needed was how to take advantage of changing seasonal conditions. The monsoon winds blow from the southwest toward India from March to September, and from the northeast toward Egypt from October to February. By following the sailor's advice and harnessing the monsoon winds, Eudoxus managed to get all the way from Egypt to India in a matter of weeks. Then, after exchanging gifts with local rajas, who were the chiefs or kings, he returned to Alexandria laden with spices and precious stones. Eudoxus's pioneering voyage revealed a fascinating new world to his contemporaries. Merchants from both east and west were soon taking advantage of the opportunities to trade across the Indian Ocean. Cosmopolitan Alexandria. After the Roman conquest of Egypt in 30 BCE, Alexandria became the main port of entry for goods arriving from the east. Having reached the Red Sea coast, these goods were transported inland by camel to the Nile and shipped to Alexandria, from where they were distributed throughout the Mediterranean. People from the Middle East and India became a common presence in the streets of Alexandria. Syrians, Arabs, Persians, and Indians rubbed shoulders with Greeks and Romans in the audiences at lectures and recitals. A tattered papyrus discovered at Oxyrhynchus, a city south of Cairo, contains the script for a comic play actually set in India. The play, called Charition, or Charition, I don't know, my bad, features a drunken and lustful Raja, a ship's captain anxiously awaiting a favorable monsoon wind. a farting fool, and Indians who speak in a fake tongue intended to evoke a barbarian language. It seems that stereotypes about the East were rife in Greco-Roman Egypt. All the goods and people had to pass through the city of Koptos, also known as Kift, a center for trade on the banks of the Nile. From here, several caravan routes departed through the eastern desert of Egypt in the direction of the Red Sea. An inscription discovered at Koptos records that those passing through in caravans had to pay tolls at varying rates depending on the traveler's profession. For example, skilled artisans paid 8 drachmas, sailors 5, soldiers' wives 20. Prostitutes, meanwhile, had to pay a hefty 108 drachmas. The journey through the desert was made at night to avoid the intense heat. The route passed military garrisons stationed along the way, where the caravans could stock up on water and food before continuing their trek. The busiest Red Sea ports were Myos Hormos, I guess today's Qasr el-Khadim, just over 100 miles or 5 or 6 days' journey east of Koptos, and Bernice, which was 250 miles or 12 days' journey south. Caravans of traders from Greece, Egypt, and Arabia congregated in these ports to receive shipments from India of ivory, pearls, ebony, sandalwood, Chinese silk, and spices. They sent the ships back to India laden with wine and other Western goods. During Roman rule, the traffic was intense. Up to 120 ships sailed every year to India from Myos Hormos alone. This was a huge increase from the situation under the Ptolemies' reign, when only a few intrepid explorers like Eudoxus of Cyzicus had dared to make the crossing. Red Sea to Indian Ocean. A merchant's handbook of the Indian Ocean dating to the mid-1st century CE, known as the Periplus Maris Erythrae, mentions the main Indian ports where these ships arrived. They were Bar Gaza, modern-day Bharuch in Gujarat, Muziris, believed by many scholars to be on the site of modern-day Pattanam in Kerala, and Poduke, present-day Archaeology in Puducherry. The Rajas had attracted a good number of travelers to these ports, as well as merchants, musicians, concubines, intellectuals, and priests who thronged the streets. In Muziris, for example, there were so many foreigners that they even erected a temple dedicated to the first Roman emperor, Augustus. A young student from Alexandria could now decide to embark on an adventurous trip across the Indian Ocean instead of the typical cruise on the Nile. However, few travelers ventured beyond India. The Periplus Maris Erythrae confirms that silk came from China and was brought overland through the Himalaya to the Indian port of Bar Gaza. The Chinese were known as the Saris, or silk men, but very few traders had seen a Chinese person. Some even thought of the Chinese as blue-eyed and blonde-haired. They may have confused them with the Caucasian-featured middlemen who traded with the Chinese in Afghanistan. Many Romans, knowing nothing of the silkworms, believed that Chinese silk was a kind of plant fiber. The poet Virgil writes in the Georgics, about silk being harvested as if it were fluff produced by a tree. The Ceres comb from off the leaves their silky fleece. In the West, many people were aware that a distant country existed, where a fine cloth was produced and brought back to be woven with gold thread in Alexandria, or dyed with the imperial purple of Tyre. But the exact location of this marvelous place was a mystery to most. Having arrived in India, the merchants did not usually travel on to China directly. They would first stop in the island of Trapobani, which is Sri Lanka today, and then, crossing the Strait of Malacca, continued to Katagara, today's Ok-O, in the delta of the Mekong River in Vietnam. Precious stones carved with Roman-inspired motifs and medals bearing the effigies of the Roman Emperor Antoninus Pius and Marcus Aurelius have been found here, along with Chinese and Indian objects. The finds suggest that Katagara was a bustling trading center, and this raises the possibility that the supposed Roman ambassadors in China who presented themselves at the court of Luoyang on behalf of Marcus Aurelius were in fact merchants from Katagara. The treacherous overland route. Merchants also had the option of traveling eastward overland by camel across the steppes and deserts of Central Asia. These overland routes had been established for centuries. The Nabateans from Arabia brought incense in caravans from Yemen to Petra in modern-day Jordan, and then on to the Mediterranean via the ports of Al-Arish, or Egypt, and Gaza. The merchants of Palmyra, the legendary Venice of the sands, imported silks, pearls, and all kinds of spices from Mesopotamia and the Persian Gulf. But the Roman emperors always wanted to trade with China directly, cutting out any intermediaries. Yet trying to do this over land routes was fraught with difficulty and danger. Rome's enemy, the Parthians, who controlled a powerful empire in what is today Iran, Afghanistan, and Pakistan, would divert the Roman caravans to the ports and markets under their control. The Romans made numerous attempts to open new overland routes to the east. Geographer Isidore of Charax, thought to be in the service of Emperor Augustus, described the routes from Roman Syria to the Archaeology region of Afghanistan in the 1st century BCE pamphlet Parthian Stations. It details the distances between towns and mentions where there are strongholds and royal treasures. It even specifies the points at which a Roman contingent could replenish its supplies or ford a river. The geographers Ptolemy and Marinus of Tyre, writing in the 2nd century CE, both mention Gnaeus Titianus, a traveler described as being of Macedonian origin. Gnaeus Titianus paid for a commercial expedition to China, hiring traders who started their journey at Hierapolis, today Manbij, in Syria. Then they went south through Mesopotamia and crossed the Tigris River to continue their journey to Bactria, which today is Balkh in Afghanistan. At that point, they were still only halfway to China. Ahead of them lay a journey of several weeks to reach Tashkurgan and the upper reaches of the Yarkant River. It would take another 10 days to reach Kashgar in the western Tarim Basin and then cross the Pamirs to enter Chinese territory. It is not known if the traders hired by Gnaeus Titianus ever reached the capital of the Han Empire. The Chinese sources specify that the first contact with the West was that of the merchants who traveled from Malaysia in 166 CE. But Mayus's party would have spent almost 2 years on their trek across Eurasia. Compared with the few weeks needed to cross the Indian Ocean from the ports of the Red Sea, it's understandable that a mission like that of Maius Titianus would have been exceptional. The closest most Westerners got to the East was through buying silk fabrics in the markets of Greece and Rome. There, no doubt, wily merchants would tell wondrous tales of their journeys to the East as they tried to extract the highest price possible for their precious goods. Over time, mathematics, languages, enslaved people, inventions, and the Black Death have traveled the routes. Although the use of the Silk Roads would rise and fall, Rome and Han China experienced 2 additional periods of intense trade. During China's Tang Dynasty from 618 to 907 CE, multi-directional trade boomed. A final revival occurred under Mongol control in the 13th and 14th centuries. The Silk Roads dwindled when the Ottoman Empire prevented Europe's direct overland trade with the East and imposed high taxes, causing increased use of maritime routes. As merchants began searching for new paths to Asia, one Italian explorer, Christopher Columbus, would sail to the Americas. Now let's briefly look at the pictures here, but not really briefly because we have a fantastic map here of the various routes. So here's my pencil. And let's see where we can go. First, the main Silk Road is this bright red line, so let's just trace around and see how we travel. We breaks off here in Samarkand by way of Tashkent through the Pamir Mountains here. You can go this way through the Taklamakan or this way. Then meet up right around here. Looks like around Donghuang through the Gansu corridor to Luoyang there. Now the other land routes are these tiny red lines we can see if we're leaving Luoyang. Go up here to what's now Beijing. Up here to what's now Ulaanbaatar. Come down there as well. There are the routes here to meet the main road. We can follow the Sirdarya River past the Aral Sea, which was probably much, much bigger back then. Or you can come from, it looks like Merv, near Merv. Apparently then it was called Antioch and Margiana. Never heard that name. Over the Caspian Sea to reach Trebizond in Turkey. Or there's the route through Egypt through the Nile. Down here, sailing down or just heading past, I guess, what is it called? I want to say the Sudanese, but they weren't called that then. The Kush, I guess. Passing the putt down to Meroe. I'm heading all the way down to the Horn of Africa. And then you can see all the sea routes, or you can head down to Serapion down there. I hope you can see. I hope I'm still in frame. I'm not looking at the viewfinder. But then look at all these sea routes cutting through the Red Sea here. And of course going up to Rome there. Heading down to the strait there. What's it called? But there's Aden right there. In what's now Yemen. Going across the sea to various places in India. Right here by the Indus. Up here there's that town Gaza. Over here to Masiris. Or all the way around to head all the way down here. Goodness, to go to the Gulf of Tonkin up there. To go to, I guess, what's now Hong Kong. Yeah, Canton there. And then, of course, there's overland routes throughout India. Heading up here to the Kushan Desert. There's Bactria, today's Balk, Bagram. Here's, of course, the Himalayas, which you can't really pass through, but it looks like they found a way for here to reach China. Or, I guess, following the mountains this way. There's all kinds of routes here. Going up the Irrawaddy River. And then throughout China. So many different Silk Roads, right? There wasn't just one long road. And yeah, traveling from one end to the other was not a common thing. There were, like, you can count probably all the people who did it on one hand, to be honest. This is, I guess, the story of Maius Titianus, they said. And it says that this is a relief that shows musicians entertaining courtiers. Okay. Here's a beautiful vase from the Roman Empire. It had ointments and oils from the east inside of it. These are the Pamir Mountains, right? Punjab Pass, where China meets Pakistan. So yeah, imagine having to traverse all these with your wagon full of silks and spices. Very treacherous. Plus you never know if there's like bandits hiding around a corner or if the weather will change. Very terrifying. This is a funerary stela that shows a Roman woman, it says. Okay. And here's, of course, this has to be Palmyra, right? Yes, Palmyra. You can tell by the columns. This is a statue showing an Indian goddess that was discovered in Pompeii. How interesting. This is an old fortress here in China. This is in Tashkurgan, near Tashkurgan. These are the Pamir Mountains back here. They pretty much separate like China from Afghanistan. We'll be talking about that region pretty soon. This is Alexandria, bustling and busy during Roman rule. You can tell by the architecture. Right? And this is, I guess, a mural. Oh, this is also from Pompeii, from the Villa of Mysteries, and you can see she's holding the purple silk here. Or at least the purple that's made from Tyre, what's now Lebanon. This is that map they were mentioning, where you can see here the temple to Augustus. It's pretty cool. And we have a pendant from the Kushan Empire here, which shows Constantine the Great. How interesting. Very east meets west. A pagoda for, let's see, the Great Wild Goose Pagoda in Xi'an is for the monk Xuanzang, who traveled along the Silk Road. That's Marcus Aurelius. You can tell by his very curly hair. And then this is really neat, I think. This, I guess, carving along the wall here, but they're selling silk. Look at that. They're holding up the silk. What do you think? Would you be interested in purchasing? And then we have a little clay camel over here. How cute. All right. Very interesting. Because, you know, when you learn about the Silk Roads in history class in school, you just picture like an actual road, and you imagine that, like, you know, someone would leave from China and they'd set off all the way to Rome and then come all the way back. That did not happen. None of that was true. But we're going to read about a Silk Road town called Dandan-Oilik. It doesn't really talk about it, but a lot of these little towns were set up along the Silk Roads, right? Mainly as stopover towns, kind of like if you're driving across America today, there'll be a little tiny town where when you first arrive, there's a big gas station, a bunch of fast food, a little shop, and then you have all the little houses behind it. A little roadside town, right? So that's what this is. There's probably a caravanserai or something similar where people could rest overnight if they were continuing on, or meeting centers where one trader would meet the next person who would send it off for a price, of course. But let's read about the discovery of this town. Very interesting story. I don't need my pencil for that. When geographer Sven Hedin, I hope I'm saying that name right, Hedin, set out from the city of Khotan, which is today Hotan in western China, he expected to find ruins from an ancient town, but much more lay hidden in the desert sands. The name of Khotan resonated with Western explorers in the 19th century because famous Phoenician explorer Marco Polo visited it in 1274. In his writings, Polo noted Khotan's wealth as an outpost on the Silk Road, the route that once carried trade between China and the Mediterranean world. On January 14th, 1896, a caravan left from the city. The 5-man party was accompanied by mules and loaded with provisions to last 50 days. Riding ahead, perched on a camel, was their leader, Hayden. Nicknamed the Stanley of the Central Asian deserts, after explorer Henry Morton Stanley, the Swedish-born Hayden was a polymath and intrepid adventurer. On arriving in Khotan, he overheard men talking of a ruined town out in the desert and immediately hired them as guides to lead him to the ruins. A town under sand. For several days, Hayden and his companions followed the western bank of the Uruncox River before managing to cross it at a frozen ford. Soon after, they entered the immense Taklamakan Desert with its treacherous, shifting dunes. From there, their progress became as slow as it was arduous. 6 hours walking a day was the most they could endure as they negotiated the high dunes, spurring on their reluctant beasts of burden. Hayden, meanwhile, made notes in his field diary, which later became the basis of his memoirs. On January 23rd, the party came to a depression in the desert, abounding in kotek, i.e. dead forest, Hayden wrote. Short tree stems and trunks, gray and brittle as glass, branches twisted like corkscrews from the drought. Hayden, well versed in geography, deduced that they must be on the ancient course of a river called the Daria, an area that had once been fertile enough to support habitation. Hayden's guides told him that the ruins they were looking for were nearby. Fragments of pottery corroborated this. The next day they left the camp and headed to the ruins, Hayden's men carrying spades and hatchets. Of all the sights Hayden had seen in his expeditions across Asia, none resembled what he saw there. The settlement, whose ruins lay before him, had been built using a framework of poplar trunks, which gave the buildings a distinctive whitish color. For this reason, the place had become known by locals as Dandan-Oilik, meaning houses of ivory. As he made his way through the site, Hayden discerned the outline of square and oblong-shaped buildings, the interior of each divided into several rooms. Poles up to 10 feet high were still standing where they once would have supported a roof or even a second floor. The group found traces of many dwellings covering an estimated area of about 1.5 square miles. Hide the advertisement there. But it was impossible to draw up a plan of the town because the patterns of streets and squares were hidden under the sand dunes. Hayden knew all too well that he lacked the means to investigate further. Excavating in the dry sand is desperate work, he wrote. As fast as you dig it out, it runs in again and fills up the hole. Each sand dune must be entirely removed before it will give up the secrets that lie hidden beneath it, and that is the task beyond human power. Nevertheless, Hayden acquired a general idea of what the ancient enclave would have been like. Musing on its erasure by the dunes, Hayden referred to it as this god-accursed city, this second Sodom in the desert, and believed erroneously that it was some 2,000 years old. Revealing images. Most remarkable of all Hayden's findings were the exquisite Indo-Persian style paintings decorating some of the interiors. Hayden identified these structures, larger than the rest, as Buddhist temples. The paintings flaked off at the slightest touch. Hayden sketched them as best he could, and, in keeping with the colonialist mindset of the era, took other objects, such as sculptures and stucco reliefs, writing later, "All these finds and many other relics were wrapped up carefully and packed in my boxes, and the fullest possible notes on the ancient city were entered in my diary." Despite the wonders he had glimpsed, Hayden decided to move on. For me, it was sufficient to have made the important discovery and to have won in the heart of the desert a new field for archaeology. The morning after writing this, he left Dandan-Oilik and plunged back into the shifting sands of the Taklamakan Desert. Around the same time that Hayden was undertaking his desert journeys, a young Hungarian-born Briton, Mark Aurel Stein, was making a name for himself as a scholar of Persian and Sanskrit. In 1898, Hayden's memoir, Through Asia, was published. The book had a huge influence on Stein, then in his late 30s. 2 years later, he embarked on the first of 4 expeditions to Central Asia. Following in Hayden's footsteps, Stein arrived in Khotan in winter 1900. There, his guide showed him objects from the site, including fragments of frescoes from temples, some with Brahmi script, which was a writing system of ancient India. Energized by this proof, Stein set off through the freezing wastes of the Taklamakan to arrive at Dandan-Oilik in late December 1900. His extensive knowledge of Buddhist art and scripture helped him establish the site as an abandoned oasis town that had thrived from the 6th century CE. But what had happened to the town that forced its citizens to abandon its bustling streets and splendidly adorned temples? Oasis Trade Hub. After several weeks, Stein established that as many as 14 Buddhist temples had once dominated the town. They consisted of a cella, the sacred part of the temple, and the core, which was nested inside a larger structure. Among the artworks were magnificent stucco figures of Buddhas and well-preserved paintings on wooden boards. To Stein's excitement, he recognized the themes of some of the paintings, including one illustrating the silkworm legend. This tells the story of a young Chinese noblewoman wed to the king of Khotan. Flouting the rule that silkworms cannot leave the Chinese heartland, the young bride smuggles mulberry seeds and silkworms to her husband in her headdress. The legend deftly links the town's Buddhist piety and its prosperity on the Silk Road. Among the last datable items that Stein found were 8th century coins. Stein theorized that the town's decline must have been tied to China losing administrative control of the region in that period. Later studies, including a joint China-Japan excavation in 2002, corroborated this. In the 700s, as geopolitics changed with the rapidity of the dunes, the thriving town, with its trade, art, and temples, was abandoned, and the sands swallowed the glory that had been Dandan-Oilik. Here you can see one of these frescoes. It's clearly Ganesh, right? A Hindu god. It's so beautiful. Really remarkable. That painting has lasted for as long as it has. There's Sven Hayden with his Bactrian camel behind this great looking yurt here. What do we have down here? Well, this is another painting from Dandan-Oilik. It's in the British Museum currently, it says. Or Scala Florence, I'm not sure, but you can see the traders there. Here's the town, and you can see the poplar trunks there that made up, I guess, the little poles, banisters, things like that, inside or around this neat building here. There's Sven Hayden. And there's the map. You can see China, there's Beijing, and that's where Dandan-Oilik is located in the Taklamakan Desert. But that's all that I have for you for tonight. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoy this style of content, please consider subscribing, because we will have more magazine articles soon. And if you want to choose which articles I'll be reading, because right now I don't even know what the next video will be about, what the topic will be, because you guys decided. If you want to help me decide, you can click the join button right down there for only 99 US cents a month. The lowest possible price I can set it to. YouTube's always telling me to raise it, to make tiers that are more and more expensive, and I say no. I want this to be available to as many people as possible to get all these fun perks on my channel. I could be making a lot more if I did, but that's not what this is about. This is for you guys to enjoy some fun content. So I'd love to have you join our fun little club. It's great. Please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you're still awake. I hope you're not, but if you are, give it a thumbs up. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. I hope you found this video to be relaxing and educational. And I hope that you have a good night. Good night.